Some dare call it conspiracy.
Hello Initiates, we've got a Some Dare Call It Conspiracy extra portion for you here. This is a blog that I did quite a while ago, and it's a bit of an interesting one because at the time I was still dangling my feet in the conspiracy world quite heavily. But at the time, the EU was considered to be the worst thing on the planet. It was the stepping stone to the New World Order. It was tyrannical. They were imposing all sorts of laws on us and making our lives particularly hellish. And so I discovered that wasn't really true. And so the weird thing about this blog is it's me trying to sort of pander to the conspiracy crowd whilst actually finding stuff out about the conspiracy crowd that isn't true. It also includes mind control, manipulation programs, media manipulation, think tanks, the oil industry, stolen elections, and all that stuff that should appeal to the conspiracy crowd, but in this case didn't at all because it doesn't go along with their preconceived narrative. This is the story of Cambridge Analytica, a real conspiracy that was completely ignored by the conspiracy crowd.
Hello everyone. I've been investigating Cambridge Analytica for some time now. Cambridge Analytica is a mind control program used to control elections across the globe. As some of you may know, this has been recorded in a blog series available on my website, neilsandersmindcontrol.com. Quite a few people have requested that I put these out as a podcast, and who am I to deny you my dulcet tones? So I'm going to read out the blog posts as they are found on the website. Are we sitting comfortably? I actually realise you can't answer that, but I'm going to assume you are, and I'm going to press on. Cambridge Analytica and the creation of the right-wing media, and this was published on Saturday the 14th of July 2018. Hello everyone! So I've decided to start writing a blog, and here's the first one. A blog gives a chance to put down far more detail than can be contained in a Facebook post, and allows for people to share it easily to people who may shun social media. Please have a look, share, and feel free to contact me with suggestions for future topics. The first blog is about Cambridge Analytica and the attempted campaign to flood alternative media with right-wing viewpoints and far-right personalities in order to normalise these concepts and have them gain acceptance. Ultimately, this is for the benefit of certain elites, as I have attempted to show, but it is being cunningly presented as a popularist uprising. In this investigation, I've discovered that the majority of these new right-leaning media figures are actually sponsored by elite figures within the political and business world, and despite their protestations and outward appearances, they are not fighting for the rights of the people, but are in fact serving a completely different agenda. So I've been banging on about Cambridge Analytica for ages now. Please have a look at the shows I did on Rich Planet, Richie Allen, and Den of Law. Basically, I've been saying that this group is run by mysterious billionaires with links to the establishment, government, and military of both the UK and USA, and they boast about being able to change behaviour in populations and control the outcome of elections. The tactics they use are remarkably similar to those already exposed as being part of GCHQ or Pentagon social media and online manipulation programs, which is troubling to say the least. Robert Mercer, the main financier of Cambridge Analytica, was also the main financier of the Trump campaign and the main financier of Breitbart, the right-wing media organisation. I suggested that he was attempting to use Trump as his way to gain influence on a governmental level and to use his media outlets to promote far-right propaganda disguised as alternative or conspiracy media in order to normalise views that would normally be dismissed as elitist by the public. Responses thus far have been mixed. Well, since then, I've discovered that the tactics of Cambridge Analytica were under export control by the UK government and considered a psychological weapon not to be deployed without consultation, and that Robert Mercer's tentacles go even further than I had previously thought. The first point was exposed by former Cambridge Analytica employee Brittany Kaiser, who told the recent committee investigating the actions of the company that she had seen documents in which Nigel Oakes, the co-founder of the SCL Group and the head of its defence division, revealed the company's audience targeting methodology was for several years export controlled by the British government. That would mean that the methodology was considered a weapon. Weapons-grade communication tactics, she said, which means we had to tell the British government if that was going to be deployed in another country outside the United Kingdom. So, here's a quick summary of what's going on. Robert Mercer is a mysterious billionaire, an early developer in the technology of artificial intelligence, a former CEO of hedge fund firm Renaissance Technologies, and the chief financer of Breitbart. He stepped away from Breitbart and Renaissance Technologies in 2017 when a lawsuit exposed some of his extremely right-wing views that he had shared openly with colleagues and employees. Robert Mercer invested in Breitbart with money from his own personal fortune and some from the Koch brothers via an investment arm called GAI. GAI was ran by Mercer ally and ex-Goldman Sachs executive Steve Bannon, whose films Mercer has also financed. Steve Bannon goes on to become chief editor of Breitbart when Andrew Breitbart dies, and later campaign manager and a top aide to President Trump. Mercer is the main financier of Breitbart. In the White House, Bannon is flanked by his protege Stephen Miller and Mercer loyalist Kellyanne Conway. The Panama Papers reveal Breitbart avoids tax by using offshore accounting methods, which does not, on the surface, appear terribly patriotic. The Breitbart London office was set up by Steve Bannon specifically to help UKIP. Nigel Farage and Robert Mercer have been friends for years. Mercer sets up Cambridge Analytica with friend of the British royal family and MI5 spy Nigel Oakes in 2012 by merging with British military psyops firm SCL, a company that boasts of using psychological means to gain behavioural change in populations and claims to be able to dictate the results of elections. Cambridge Analytica SCL has board members that include British intelligence, British psychological warfare specialists, weapons manufacturers, friends and relatives of the Queen, ex-Special Forces, ex-US Marines, and a plethora of right-wing lords, Tory MPs, and elites with links to the British establishment. They boast of overthrowing governments and altering the outcome of elections in over 100 countries by micro-targeting, spreading propaganda, and leveraging false enemies. Its clients include the MOD, DOD, US government, UK government, and NATO. They have board connection with other non-governmental agencies such as the mercenary army Blackwater and panopticon data mining firm Palantir, ran by CIA-affiliated Peter Thiel. The methods of SCL and Cambridge Analytica are under export control by the British government and are considered a psychological weapon that has to get approval from the British government before being deployed. Their main tactic in recent electoral campaigns in Africa, America, and Europe was to heighten fears of Islam with fake campaigns, leveraging a fake enemy, and hyping up problems that didn't exist or grossly exaggerating existing concerns with propaganda and scare tactics. They steal thousands of data points, personal messages, and interactions and apply their military psychological warfare tactics and AI algorithms to determine what makes you tick, and more importantly, what makes you angry. They then personalize their approach to specific targets and bombard them with stories that would guarantee to press their buttons. They bombard you with personalized advertising campaigns and sock puppet accounts that coerce you into a particular train of thought. They started using quizzes on social media to test the psychological effectiveness and marketing power of phrases such as drain the swamp, build the wall, and deep state as early as 2014. So that their candidate could utilize this branding and create a favorable image, whoever they might be. At that point, it was Ted Cruz. Professor Emma Bryant of Essex University has been studying the actions of Cambridge Analytica and stated, using Cambridge Analytica's media strategy, Trump's false racist and Islamophobic comments, resentment and fear were deployed where they would be most effective, mobilizing swing state audiences, using voters' personal data to monitor them, and using psychological profiling to manipulate their emotional responses en masse. Her colleague Damien Collins said, data analytics was used to target voters who were concerned about this issue and to frighten them with messaging designed to create an artificial enemy for them to act against. Alexander Nix, chairman of Cambridge Analytica, boasted about their tactics and the scale of their resources in 2016, saying, today in the USA, we have somewhere close to 4,000 or 5,000 data points on every individual. So we model the personalities of every adult across the USA, some 230 million people. An employee of Cambridge Analytica stated, "The goal is to capture every single aspect of every voter's information environment." Andy Wigmore, the communications director for Leave.eu, was extremely candid about the company until somebody pointed out that the financing of such a clandestine campaign was illegal, and he went back on previous statements. Originally, he bragged, "A Facebook like was their most potent weapon because using artificial intelligence as we did tells you all sorts of things about that individual and how to convince them with what sort of advert. And you know there would be other people in their network who liked what they liked, so it could spread. The computer never stops learning and it never stops monitoring." When he was told that this was creepy, Andy Wigmore said, "Yes, it is creepy. That's why I'm not on Facebook." Cambridge Analytica was shown to be a vital component in the exit from the EU and the election of Trump. As stated in the recent inquiry, the methods of SCL and Cambridge Analytica are under export control by the British government and are considered a psychological weapon that has to get approval from the British government before being deployed. This means that elements of the British government and establishment knew what Cambridge Analytica were doing and wanted the outcome they promised, which was Trump as president and an exit from the EU. Steve Bannon oversaw the illegal data collection and was involved in the strategy of Cambridge Analytica as early as 2014, long before Trump was presented as a potential candidate. According to Cambridge Analytica whistleblowers, Bannon said he wanted to use Cambridge Analytica to discourage specific groups of people from voting, including people likely to vote Democrat. He said Michael Flynn, the former Trump national security advisor, was a consultant for Cambridge Analytica at one point. Bannon did not care if information spread by Cambridge Analytica was incorrect, whistleblowers said, because he was trying to win a culture war. He called Cambridge Analytica a full-service propaganda machine. I'm not pro-EU. I just think it's naive to assume that you can win just by voting. Those in power don't like to relinquish it, and they have contingencies. They own both horses and have planned far ahead. Furthermore, when you think you have won, that is when you let your guard down and are actually at your most vulnerable and conducive to manipulation. I have said this many times. Voting in the US election, UK election, or EU referendum was very much like being a child choosing a boarding school. It doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter which option that you decide on. The only certainty is that you're going to get screwed by an older person who is richer than you. This is not a call for another referendum. As I say, you're going to end up buggered either way, with the extravagant, useless decadence of Brussels or the tedious, wasteful ineptitude of Westminster. Obviously, many people would still not change their vote, and many people voted to leave for perfectly sensible reasons not influenced by any nefarious outside entities. However, many people voted based on lies. The fact that these lies were spread by extremely wealthy people with links to the military, government and establishment of both UK and USA, who obviously have their own agendas, gives me pause for concern. For example, it has been revealed that leaving the EU would mean that the UK's wealthiest citizens would not be subject to the proposed tax avoidance crackdown coming in 2019, off the back of the Panama Papers revelations of offshore accounting and tax hole loops enjoyed by the top echelons of society. Another point is that just prior to the announcement that the Brexit referendum had resulted in a leave vote, Nigel Farage went on all types of media and lied, telling the masses that his campaign had failed. This led to speculation on the strength of the pound, allowing hedge funds to make a quick killing. Robert Mercer's main source of income is via hedge funds, but I'm sure this is merely a coincidence. Leave.eu and other pro-Brexit campaigns illegally invested in Cambridge Analytica's tactics, and this was strangely dealt with leniently when discovered. When Cambridge Analytica was exposed, it took over a week for the British government to get its act together and get a search warrant. In the meantime, the offices of Cambridge Analytica were emptied. That looks like a cover-up to me. Steve Bannon personally oversaw the Cambridge Analytica campaign to steal your social media data, and private data and stoke outrage by spreading fake stories to specific audiences via social media, including the rape of a 13-year-old in Sweden that went unpunished and Germany allowing child marriages. These were not true. Coincidentally, these stories were spread by Breitbart, InfoWars, and others. General Michael Flynn, who is currently awaiting sentencing for lying to the FBI whilst working as part of the Trump White House, he also took bribes from the Turkish government to arrange for the slaughter of Kurds, was also on the board of governors for Cambridge Analytica. Breitbart was exposed as having neo-Nazis like Andrew Auernheimer and Devon Saucier write articles that Milo Yiannopoulos would take credit for. Breitbart and Steve Bannon have said that they are involved in a culture war and have also admitted spreading stories that they knew were fake in order to serve that culture war. Specifically, they admitted to making up stories to discredit Roy Moore's accusers, who said he was essentially a child molester. So they protected a child molester. Since being dropped by Breitbart, Milo still had the use of Robert Mercer's private security team and has more recently been seen on InfoWars. Milo said that he'd been on boat parties and seen young boys having sex with grown men, but refused to name them, which is curious because Steve Bannon's ex-business partners were Mark Collins Rector and Brock Pierce, both convicted paedophiles that threw similar boat parties, allegedly with the director Bryan Singer in attendance. Shortly before he rose to fame doxing people during the Gamergate debacle, Milo Yiannopoulos was employed by the Catholic Herald, where he mostly wrote articles about how mean the internet was and how it should be regulated to protect people's feelings. Robert Mercer is pretty clear in his political beliefs and ideologies and has given $45 million to far-right campaigns and $62 million to far-right think tanks in the last several years. Cambridge Analytica was used semi-legally in the USA after consulting with Rudy Giuliani's law firm and had a campaign that flooded swing states and middle America with sock puppet accounts spewing bile, fake stories designed to outrage, and videos showing France and Germany under Sharia law. Many of these videos were produced or shared by Gatestone Media, which also provides content for Rebel Media. John Bolton sits on the board of Gatestone Media. He was the architect of the war on terror, and now he is the National Security Advisor for the Trump administration. The main owner of Gatestone is Nina Rosenwald, who is heiress to the Sears empire. Nina Rosenwald was, in 2003, a recipient of the Louis Brandeis Award given by the Zionist Organization of America for her pro-Israel advocacy. Rebecca Mercer, daughter of Robert, also helps fund Gatestone Media via her family foundation. Funding for Gatestone also comes from the MEF, the Middle East Forum, a hardline, conservative, pro-Israel think tank. Robert Mercer also finances Rebel Media. Rebel Media employs Tommy Robinson, Lauren Southern, and Laura Loomer, all of whom are right-wing antagonists that are pretty scant with the facts. Most of these people have at some point been promoted by Breitbart or InfoWars. Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, Paul Harris, whatever he goes by on that particular day, and James O'Keefe also receive funding via the David Horowitz Freedom Center, which is financed by Robert Shillman, who is a board member for Friends of Israel's Defense Forces. Robert Shillman also provides funding for Rebel Media. Nina Rosenwald, the heiress to Sears, also funds James O'Keefe and Project Veritas. Geert Wilders, the Dutch far-right antagonist, is also financed by the David Horowitz Freedom Center. The MEF also helps fund Tommy Robinson's legal team. He is currently in jail for breach of bail conditions. He jeopardized a trial by filming the defendants specifically against court orders. According to the MEF, the organization is also sponsoring and organizing the second Free Tommy Robinson gathering in London on July the 14th. The statement was signed by MEF Director Greg Roman, who has previously worked in Israel's defense and foreign ministries. MEF President Daniel Pipes, meanwhile, has been described by the Southern Poverty Law Center as an anti-Muslim activist. Robert Mercer and the Koch brothers also finance James O'Keefe at Project Veritas, who often interacted with Breitbart and InfoWars, most famously on his failed sting on Acorn and Planned Parenthood, where he dressed up as a pimp and offered the companies the profits from his trafficking ring. He was arrested shortly afterwards. The Daily Caller is also financed by the Koch brothers. Dave Rubin and the Rubin Report are also financed by the Koch brothers. The Washington Free Beacon is also financed by the Koch brothers. Ben Shapiro was financed by the Koch brothers before he left Breitbart. It is not publicly flaunted who he is financed by now, but Alex Jones, in a recent hissy fit, threatened to expose his billionaire backers. Ben Shapiro's The Daily Wire is actually financed by the Wilkes brothers. Dan and Faris Wilkes are right-wing fundamentalist Christians who made their money via the fracking industry. They donated over $15 million in 2016 to a super PAC supporting Ted Cruz, who was the original choice of Cambridge Analytica. The Wilkes brothers also finance PragerU, a conservative media outlet that champions causes that they favour. Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin and Candace Owens have made videos for PragerU, amongst others. Similar to Breitbart, the Daily Caller has also been exposed for having writers that espouse far-right sentiment and are members of far-right organisations. Atlantic magazine listed the reporters that have been exposed as racist. Scott Greer. Greer spent his time at the Daily Caller writing about immigration and the alt-right, along with pieces that painted Native Americans as violent cannibals, blaming black people for the racial disparity in police shootings, referring to the slain 12-year-old Tamir Rice as a large male, and providing a sympathetic platform to a man fired from his job for turning up at a Confederate monument rally in New Orleans decked out in a helmet and shield. According to The Atlantic, Greer started working at the Daily Caller in 2014, while his pseudonym, Michael McGregor, was listed as the managing editor of Radix. Peter Brimlow. Brimlow runs the white supremacist website vdare.com. In March 2017, he wrote a column for the Daily Caller in which he argued that the United States was to be a nation-state, the political expression of a particular white British people, as in Europe. As Rational Wiki notes, vdare.com appears to be mainly a platform for Peter Brimlow's anti-immigration views, which veer frequently into playing footsie with overt white nationalism. The other topics are window dressing. Brimlow has admitted that VDare does publish people who consider themselves white nationalists. In August 2018, White House speechwriter Darren Beattie was fired for appearing alongside Brimlow at a conference. Moses Apostasius. That's the rather august-sounding pen name of David Hilton, an anti-Semitic writer who has posted memes expressing the belief that Israel was behind the September 11th terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center. In September 2016, the Daily Caller published an op-ed by Hilton promoting the cultural Marxism conspiracy theory, which posits that any criticism of institutional oppression is a Marxist ruse meant to attack the straight white male. In a January 27 Daily Caller piece, Hilton promoted another anti-Semitic conspiracy theory and accused billionaire philanthropist George Soros of deploying foot soldiers in his scheme to implement a globalist oligarchy. The Koch brothers, via a series of conduits, also provide financing for the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation is a right-wing think tank that tries to sway public policy. It is described as one of the most influential conservative research centres in the world. Rebecca Mercer has been on the board of trustees since 2014. At least 66 foundation employees and alumni got staffing positions in the Trump administration. The foundation also recommended cabinet ministers Scott Pruitt, Betsy DeVos, Mick Mulvaney, Rick Perry, and Jeff Sessions. Candace Owens, despite claiming to be fiercely independent, works for Turning Point USA, a far-right organisation funded by the billionaire Betsy DeVos and by the Koch brothers. Candace Owens has also appeared on InfoWars and the Rubin Report. The DeVos family over the years have financed the Republican Party to the tune of over $200 million. Betsy DeVos is the current Secretary of Education for the USA. And Betsy DeVos is part of a conservative think tank funded by the Koch brothers. So, by a remarkable coincidence, the media outlets owned by Robert Mercer and the Koch brothers, and those employed by said outlets, spread anger and discontent in a manner surprisingly similar to that of the company also financed by Robert Mercer, which works for the British government and intelligence agencies when they wish to ensure their preferred outcomes in elections and induce behavioural changes in populations. Anyone else find this a little bit suspicious? Richard Spencer of the NPI, who claimed to have coined the term alt-right, is also financed by the multimillionaire William Regnery II of the elite Regnery family. Regnery also funds the right-wing think tank the Charles Martel Society. Aide to Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, was a longtime friend of Richard Spencer. Miller was the aide who proposed Trump's Muslim ban and his policy to take away children from their parents at the border to act as a deterrent to further immigration. While at Duke University, Miller and the Duke Conservative Union helped co-member Richard Spencer, a Duke graduate student at the time, with fundraising and promotion for an immigration policy debate in March 2007 between the Open Borders activists and University of Oregon professor Peter Laufer and journalist Peter Brimelow, the founder of VDare. Spencer would later become an important figure in the white supremacist movement and president of the National Policy Institute, and famous for coining the term alt-right. Spencer stated in a media interview that he'd spent a lot of time with Miller at Duke and that Miller had actually mentored him. Describing their close relationship, Spencer said that he was kind of glad that nobody's talked about this for fear of harming President Trump. Richard Spencer also organised the Unite the Right March with Jason Kessler at Trump Tower. By a huge coincidence, on the day that they arranged it, Nigel Farage and Stephen Miller were also in the building. Dinesh D'Souza has the majority of his books published by the Regnery family and has appeared on Mercer Finance Rebel Media more than a few times. D'Souza was recently pardoned by President Trump after pleading guilty to making illegal campaign donations in another person's name. So where does that leave us then? Breitbart is financed by the elites. Rebel Media is financed by the elites, and therefore their stars, Robinson, Southern, Loomer, Bannon, Yiannopoulos, etc., they're all financed by the elites. Richard Spencer is financed by the elites. The Daily Caller is financed by the elites. Dave Rubin is financed by the elites. Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk are financed by the elites. Candace Owens is financed by the elites. Cambridge Analytica is financed by the elites, and it's a tool of elements of the UK government. You may not care. You may still believe what these people and these outlets say. Fair enough. But again, the fact that these entities are owned and promoted by extremely wealthy people with links to the military, government and establishment of both the UK and the USA, who obviously have their own agendas, gives me pause for concern. So, in conclusion, 1. There is a company called Cambridge Analytica that bypasses democracy and covertly influences elections all over the globe with a combination of social media, fake news, and military psychological warfare tactics, specifically creating artificial enemies to rally against. 2. They have connections to the MOD, British Military Intelligence, MI5, MI6, the US State Department, and the British establishment. The tactics used by SCL are considered a weapon and are under export control by the British government. 3. They use tactics alarmingly similar to established GCHQ programs like JTRIG and US military and intelligence operations designed to influence behavior via social media and affect mood. 4. They are owned or financed by mysterious far-right billionaires and millionaires that have a white supremacist ideology. They also finance several arms of alternative media and appear to be trying to normalize far-right propaganda by spreading it through the alternative media. 5. They are also connected to various data mining and monitoring companies that are part of the ever-expanding total information control grid. Do you ever get the feeling that you've been cheated?
Some dare call it conspiracy.